Hey, welcome to Agnes Thompson's channel. My name's Martha, and I'm going to share my story with you.
My husband, Robert, always joked that our relationship was built on two things: silence and strong coffee. And at 68, with life in our house on Maple Road in Connecticut settled into a predictable, gentle rhythm, I couldn't have agreed more. We had our own world, made up of morning news on CNN, his favorite armchair that I'd been meaning to reupholster, and my garden, which he affectionately called my quiet chaos. His life as a lawyer was filled with noise and argument. Mine, in contrast, was a safe harbor, and I always thought I was his shore. I, Martha, have always been a person who believed in the value of simple things. I was never a career woman, never a socialite. I was a homemaker, a mother, a grandmother, and, as I believed, a faithful and beloved wife. My hands knew the feel of soil. My great passion was my garden. I didn't just grow flowers. I created my own small ecosystem where every plant had its place and purpose. My collection of herbs was a particular point of pride. I gathered them, dried them, and made tinctures and teas. I knew that lavender soothed, mint aided digestion, and chamomile was a universal remedy for everything. This was a legacy I inherited from my mother, and she from hers. It was our family tradition, our little secret that I had hoped to pass on. My granddaughter, Chloe, who was 16, was supposed to be the next keeper. One sunny morning in early September, when the air already hinted at the coming autumn, I was trying to show her how to properly dry sage. "See, Chloe, you have to tie them in small bunches. That way they don't lose their aroma," I said, showing her how a thin string wrapped around the fuzzy stems. Chloe sat on the old wooden bench, her eyes glued to her phone screen. She mumbled something incomprehensible without looking up. "Grandma, why do I need this?" "I have Google," she said, never once glancing away from her device. It felt like a punch to the gut. I felt the warmth I had put into this lesson just vanish. I wasn't angry with her. I was angry with time, with this new generation that believed all the world's wisdom could fit into a pocket-sized rectangle. I gave her a soft smile and said, "Google won't tell you a story, Chloe. It won't show you how your great-grandmother did this. It won't let you feel the earth." But she wasn't listening. Her world was 1,000 miles away, somewhere on TikTok or Snapchat. It was my small but painful conflict. My world, which I had so carefully built, was slowly losing its connection with the world of my children and grandchildren. Just then, Robert came out, wearing his favorite cashmere sweater. He stopped to kiss the top of my head. "Look at my Martha, the teacher," he said, his voice warm and slightly hoarse from his morning coffee. "Don't worry, she'll understand. It's not Google, it's you." He always knew how to find the right words. He always saw me, saw my small joys and worries. Or so I thought. I remember that day so well. It was a Monday, October 14th. I was making pumpkin soup, and Robert had gone for his run. He always ran on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. It was his routine. I couldn't have imagined that routine would be broken forever. I heard a siren. Not one, but several. They were getting louder and louder. With every second, I felt an anxiety building in my chest. I went out onto the porch. The siren stopped just 2 blocks from our house, on the corner of Maple Road and Oak Street, where Robert always turned. I didn't run to him. I froze. I just stood on the porch, holding the ladle I'd forgotten to put down. 2 police cars and an ambulance drove past me. And I knew. I just knew. I couldn't explain it, but the intuition that had always been my faithful companion was screaming at me. After that, everything was a blur. 2 police officers came to our door. Their faces were full of sympathy. And the words, "Heart attack. Too fast, nothing could be done." I just sat there, still holding the ladle, with one thought swirling in my head: Robert shouldn't have gone for his run so early. The house filled with people in the following days. Our 2 grown children, Jenny and Michael, came with their families. Robert's friends and colleagues were there. Everyone talked about what a wonderful man he was. "A true pillar of the community," one colleague said. "The most honest lawyer I ever knew," another added. I just nodded and smiled, as if their words comforted me. In reality, they only deepened my pain. I knew who he was. He was my Robert, and that was enough. I didn't need their validation. A week passed, then two. Everyone left. The house became quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet now. It was empty, heavy, and deafening. I stopped making soup. I stopped tending to the garden. Every time I saw his armchair, I wanted to scream. And then I would just sit and stare at it. Everything changed when the letter came. It wasn't a typical condolence letter. The envelope was thick, with the logo of a Los Angeles law firm I'd never heard of. I opened it, thinking it was some business matter of Robert's. Inside was a letter from a lawyer and a copy of a will. Not the one Robert and I had drafted 20 years ago with our notary in Hartford. This was a different one. And it was recent. My hands trembled as I held the paper. I read it, and the words seemed meaningless. A will. A different one. It had been drafted just a year ago in California. I read it again, then one more time. Robert's name. His signature. And then names. Names I didn't know. Brenda Grace. Her two children, Elijah and Sophia. And a clause. A clause that turned my world upside down. All my property, including the house on Maple Road in Connecticut, is to be divided equally between my wife, Martha Smith, and my children, Elijah Grace and Sophia Grace. I couldn't breathe. I felt the ground disappearing beneath my feet. How was this possible? Robert was with me. Every single day. In this house. How? The phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was a number from California. I didn't answer. My brain refused to work. I just sat there, clutching the letter, and felt something inside me break. Everything I believed in was a lie. Our quiet harbor, our strong coffee, his kisses on my head. It was all a lie. I called Jenny. Her voice was full of grief. "Mom, how are you?" she asked. "Jenny, I got a letter," I said, my voice trembling. "What letter, Mom?" "From who?" I couldn't say a word. I just held the phone and cried. Then I managed to explain. I heard her catch her breath. "Mom, it must be a mistake. It can't be true. Dad would never," she said, but her voice was filled with uncertainty. Then I called Michael. His reaction was sharper. "Mom, it's a scam. Throw that letter away and forget about it. I'll call our lawyers. They'll handle it." But I knew it wasn't a scam. Robert's signature was too familiar. I knew every stroke of his pen. And I knew it was him. I couldn't eat or sleep. Every small thing reminded me of Robert, and every small thing now seemed like a mockery. His armchair, his books, his favorite mug. It was all part of a lie that had lasted for years. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal. I felt foolish. How could I have not noticed? How could I have been so blind? I was his shore, his quiet harbor. And it turned out he had another shore, one I didn't even know existed. I went to our old shed, where Robert kept his tools. I just wanted to do something with my hands, to distract myself from my thoughts. There, in an old cardboard box, I found his old leather journal. It was dusty, and I barely remembered its existence. I opened it. There were old entries, his thoughts on cases, on our life, on the kids. And at the very end, on the last pages, there were entries made in a different handwriting. More hurried, more nervous. And there was a name. Brenda. The kids' names. Elijah. Sophia. And dates. Their birthdays. I saw how he bought them Christmas gifts, how he flew out for their birthdays. He had been living a double life. My husband, Robert Smith, a respected lawyer, the father of my children, was a liar. I felt more than just betrayed. I felt humiliated. 45 years of marriage. 45 years that turned out to be a facade. I thought we had a past, a present, and a future. But it turned out he had another past that had stolen my future. I closed the journal. There were no tears in my eyes. There was only an emptiness that slowly began to fill. But not with despair. It was something else. It was a cold, hard feeling like a stone. I looked at my garden. It looked so peaceful, so calm, but I knew that beneath that quiet beauty lay life and death, a struggle for survival, hidden battles. And I realized that my own battle was just beginning. The next day, I decided to act. I didn't call Michael and Jenny. I knew their emotions, their shock, their desire to believe in a good dad would get in my way. I had to do this myself. I went to our notary, Mr. Harris. He was a family friend, and I hoped he could help me make sense of it all. He greeted me with sympathy. "Martha, my dear, I'm so sorry." I cut him off. "Jim, I need your help. It's about Robert." I showed him the copy of the will. He read it, his face gradually changing from sympathy to confusion and then to professional seriousness. "Martha, I don't understand. Robert and I drafted your will 20 years ago, and it was in order. This is completely different. It doesn't follow any of the procedures we use in Connecticut." He explained that for a will to be valid in Connecticut, it had to be signed by 2 witnesses, not just a notary. And that, while a will drafted in another state could be recognized, it too had to follow all the legal formalities. The will I held in my hands was suspicious. It had the signature of a notary from Los Angeles, but no witness signatures. In that moment, I knew I had a chance. This wasn't just an act of revenge, it was an act of restoring justice. Robert wasn't stupid enough to leave a will without witnesses if he wanted it to be legal. That meant he either knew it would be contested, or he was pressured into it. I couldn't believe he wanted to deprive me of my future, so I decided this would be a war. But not a war against the memory of Robert, but a war for that memory, for the truth. I began my own investigation. I started to study everything about Robert's life over the past few years. I checked his accounts, his email, his calendar. And there I found something that troubled me. There were notes in his calendar that I hadn't noticed before. Codes. LA 12. 00 BB 10. 30. I didn't know what they meant. But I felt they were the keys to his double life. My children, Jenny and Michael, still believed it was some kind of mistake, but I no longer did. My heart was broken, but my mind was sharper than ever. I was like a gardener who had suddenly discovered that her garden was full of weeds, and she was determined to pull them out by the root. My plan was simple. I had to find answers. I had to prove that the will was invalid. I had to protect my future that had been stolen from me. I sat in his study, surrounded by his things, his smell, his past. I picked up an old photograph of us when we were young. We were happy. And I asked myself one question. Who were you, Robert, really? It was at that moment I realized that to find the answer, I would have to take risky steps I never could have imagined. I had to learn to see the world through his eyes, not mine, and see the whole picture. The next chapter of my life was not going to be about grief, but about a fight. After I closed Robert's old journal, I felt like a detective in my own life. I was no longer Martha, the heartbroken gardener. I was Martha, the seeker of truth. My mind, which had been so long consumed by grief, was now working with incredible sharpness. I had to understand what those mysterious codes in his calendar meant. I started by going back to his study. My hand didn't tremble when I opened his desk drawer and took out his old journal. Those notes. LA 12. 00 BB 10. 30. I looked at them again, trying to find some logic. Robert was a creature of habit. He was methodical to a fault. I knew his system. He always used initials. J&M for Jenny and Michael. WH for a meeting with lawyer Harrison. So what could these new initials mean? I spent hours going through his entries for the past year. And I noticed a pattern. LA 12. 00 inch was always next to a specific date. I knew LA meant Los Angeles. But what was happening at 12 o'clock? Then I found the note BB 10. 30, which was next to the date of his death. I replayed his schedule, his routine, over and over in my head. At 10:30, he should have been returning from his run. What could have happened? What could have made him break his routine? I couldn't find the answer, but I felt it was the key. It was like an invisible weed that I had to pull out to save my garden. I leaned back in his armchair, and for the first time in a long time, I felt strong. I couldn't go to court without evidence. I needed more than just suspicions. I had to gather all the information to build a logical chain that anyone could understand. I remembered his words. The one who loses isn't the one who doesn't have the truth, but the one who doesn't have the proof. The next day, I put on my best business suit, which I hadn't worn in about 10 years, and went to the bank. I had never handled Robert's finances. He always said it was his area of responsibility, and I trusted him. Now I realized that was part of his lie. I sat in the manager's office, Mr. Dawson, and explained the situation. "I need you to give me the statements for Robert's accounts for the last year," I said, trying to make my voice sound as confident as possible. Mr. Dawson looked at me with sympathy. "Mrs. Smith, I'm very sorry, but I can't do that. By law, we can only give you access to the accounts after you provide us with an official will." "I have a will," I said, pulling a copy of the fraudulent document from my purse. It was drafted in California. He took it, studied it carefully. Then he looked at me with suspicion. "Mrs. Smith, I have to tell you that this will looks questionable. It doesn't have witness signatures. I can't accept it. I strongly recommend you consult a lawyer." I knew he was right. I just nodded and thanked him. I left the bank feeling like I had taken 1 step forward and 2 steps back. I realized that this battle wouldn't just be with a Brenda and a will. It would be a battle with the system. A system that protects those who know how to use it. I decided to try a different approach. I remembered that Robert had an old friend, Frank, who worked at a big law firm in Los Angeles. I hadn't seen him in many years, but I hoped he could help. I found his number in an old phone book. I dialed it, and my heart was pounding like crazy. Frank was surprised to hear my voice. We talked about Robert, his death, and how I was doing. And then I told him about the will. I heard him fall silent as he considered my every word. "Martha, this is very strange," he finally said. "Robert was my friend. And I know he would never do something like this. But what you're saying about the will sounds very plausible. I can check a few things. Send me a copy, and I'll see what I can find." I sent him a copy of the will, and I waited for several days. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. I couldn't go back, but I didn't know what lay ahead. Finally, Frank called me. "Martha, I found something." The will was notarized, but without witnesses, which makes it invalid under Connecticut law. But what's more interesting is, this notary works at one of the most prestigious law firms in Los Angeles. And she specializes in family law. Her name is Brenda Grace. I froze. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a plan. I knew Robert was very smart, and he wouldn't have made such an obvious mistake unless there was some other reason. "Frank, what do you know about her?" I asked, and my voice was like a steel knife. "I can find out, but it will cost me my reputation, Martha," he replied. "Robert was my friend. But I'm not sure I want to dig any deeper into this." I understood him. I just asked him to check who she was and how she was connected to Robert. I knew he was hiding something. His voice was tense, and I felt he was holding something back. I couldn't blame him. He was part of Robert's old world, a world where, it seemed, I didn't exist. I started searching for information about Brenda Grace myself. In 2025, it was easy. I found her profile on LinkedIn. She was a very successful lawyer, working at a prestigious firm. I saw her photos. She was younger than me. Beautiful, elegant. I saw her children, Elijah and Sophia. They looked like Robert. Elijah had the same eyes as him. Sophia had his smile. My heart ached again, but this time the pain was mixed with anger. I began to suspect that Robert hadn't just cheated on me. He had been living a double life, and this woman was a part of it. But why? Why didn't he divorce me? Why didn't he leave? And why did he leave a will that was so clearly fraudulent? I went back to his records again. I went through his emails. I looked for keywords. Brenda, Elijah, Sophia. And I found them. Not emails, but encrypted files. They were named like some business documents. Project X or Contract 15A, but I knew Robert. He always used a very strict naming system. I downloaded them and sent them to Frank. "Frank, I need your help. I think these are encrypted files. I can't open them." He called me back a few hours later. "Martha, these aren't just encrypted files. It's an encrypted chat log. Robert was communicating with someone on a secure network." He sent me the file. It was a copy of his correspondence with Brenda. I opened it, and there were words I didn't want to read. Words of love. Words he should have been saying to me. I read and I cried. I felt something inside me dying. It was as if I had lost him again, but this time it wasn't because of death, but because of a lie. In one of the messages, I found something that troubled me. Not just words of love, but something else. Robert wrote to Brenda that he was feeling unwell. He wrote that his heart ached and that he felt very bad. And then I found what I was looking for. The code BB10. 30-inch meant Brenda's bank 1030. And I understood. He was going to transfer money to her. He didn't make it. I couldn't believe he had done this. He was trying to give them money, but he didn't have time. And this will was probably a way to give them something while he could. But why? Why didn't he just give them the money when he was alive? I felt there was some kind of pressure. I decided I had to go to Los Angeles. I had to meet Brenda. I had to look her in the eyes and find out the truth. I knew it was dangerous. I knew she might not be who she seemed. But I had to do it. I bought a ticket. I didn't tell the children. I just left them a note saying I was going away for a few days to be alone with myself. I felt like I was doing something that would completely change my life. And I knew I had to do it. I was ready for the consequences. I was ready for war. Returning to Connecticut felt like returning to a battlefield. I was no longer a confused person, but a warrior who knew what I was fighting for. I called Frank and asked him to meet me. When he arrived, I handed him the documents I had managed to collect, copies of the will, printouts of Robert's chat logs with Brenda, and my notes from Robert's journal with the mysterious codes. I told him about my trip to Los Angeles, what I saw in Brenda and her children, and how it had changed my perspective on the case. I don't just want to win the lawsuit anymore, Frank, I said. I want everyone to know the truth. I want them to understand what they've done. I want my children to see that I'm not doing this out of revenge, but out of justice. Frank listened intently, his face serious. Martha, this will be very difficult. The lawsuit will be long and messy. They'll try to paint you as a bitter, jealous old woman trying to get back something that no longer belongs to her. Let them try, I said. I'm ready. We filed the lawsuit. In the document, we contested the will on the grounds that it was not properly executed under Connecticut law and that it was signed under duress. I knew the latter would be the hardest to prove, but I had one small detail that I felt was the key: the mysterious codes in the journal. My children's reaction was predictable. They were in shock. Mom, you can't do this, Michael said. You're just hurting yourself and all of us. Jenny cried. She couldn't believe their father could have done such a thing. She was too much like him. She idealized him. Michael, Jenny, I said. I'm not doing this to cause pain. I'm doing this to restore justice. Your father, he left you something that could change your lives. And I have to protect it. My words didn't convince them. They thought I had lost my mind with grief. I realized that in this battle, I was alone again. I couldn't blame them. Their world, like mine, had been shattered. But they didn't know that I had already found a few keys. The trial began. I sat in the courtroom, surrounded by lawyers who spoke a language I barely understood. Then Brenda walked in. She was dressed in an elegant black suit. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw not hatred, but pain. I realized that she was a victim too. But she was a victim of her own greed. Or maybe I was wrong. Our lawyers began their work. Brenda's lawyers tried to portray me as a woman who knew nothing about Robert's business, who was too old to do anything. Mrs. Smith, one of the lawyers asked, "Did you ever work? Did you ever handle your husband's financial affairs?" "I've worked all my life," I said. "I worked as a gardener in my garden. I took care of my husband and my children. I was his home, his harbor." This brought some laughter in the courtroom. But I knew I was telling the truth. I was his world, his reality. I was his shore. Frank, my lawyer, was brilliant. He was calm, confident, and professional. He presented all our evidence to the court, including a copy of the old will that we had drafted with Robert many years ago. He showed that Robert was faithful to me until his death. But what about the new will? The judge asked. Frank showed the court a copy of the will drafted in California and explained that it did not comply with Connecticut law. Then he showed the court the encrypted chat log. I saw Brenda clench her hands, her face turning pale. She knew I had found what she was trying to hide. Then Frank presented the final piece of evidence to the court. He showed the court the entries from Robert's journal. BB 1030, he said. That meant Brenda's bank, 1030. Mr. Smith was going to transfer money to his second family. But he didn't make it. He died on the way to the bank. Then Frank drew attention to another code. LA 12:00. He showed the court that it meant Los Angeles, 12 o'clock. He explained that this was the time when Robert met with his financial consultant, whom I had never heard of. This consultant, Frank said, convinced Mr. Smith to invest most of his assets in a very risky fund. This fund, as we found out, was fraudulent. And Mr. Smith realized it too late. I froze. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Robert hadn't just cheated on me. He had been conned. And he was trying to save his second family by giving them everything he could before it was too late. The judge called for a recess. I walked out of the courtroom, and Brenda came up to me. Her eyes were full of tears. I didn't know, Martha, she said. I didn't know Robert was conned. He just said he wanted to give me and my children everything he could. He said he loved us. He said he just wanted to be with us. I looked at her and I understood. She was a victim too. She was a victim of love and deceit. When we returned to the courtroom, Frank presented the final piece of evidence. It was a recording of a phone call between Robert and his financial consultant. Robert was saying that he wanted to take all the money out of the fund and that he wanted his children, his second family, to be protected. But the consultant told him it was impossible, that the money had already been transferred to another fund and that he couldn't get it back. I realized that Robert wasn't trying to transfer money to his second family. He was trying to save them. He had realized he had been conned, and he was trying to fix everything. He died on his way to the bank to withdraw all the money he had left, to give it to Brenda and her children. He wanted them to be protected. But he didn't make it. It was at that moment that I knew what I had to do. I took the stand. I know my husband was conned. He was a man who believed in people, and that's what ruined him, I said. He didn't want to hurt me. He wanted to protect all of us. Mrs. Smith, the judge said. What are you trying to say? I want to say that I withdraw my claims, I said. I don't want to sue this woman. I don't want to sue her children. I want all of them to be protected. A silence fell over the courtroom. Brenda was crying. She couldn't believe what I was saying. But what about you? The judge asked. You'll get nothing. I'll get something more, I said. I'll get my family. I walked up to Brenda and hugged her. You're not to blame. We're both victims, I whispered. After the court, I met with Brenda, Elijah, and Sophia. We sat in a cafe, and I told them about Robert, his life, his love for me. I didn't hide anything. I told them about his love for the garden, his love for strong coffee. And I told them he didn't want them to be conned. It was at that moment that I realized that my gift, which I had so wanted to pass on to my granddaughter, wasn't in herbs and tinctures. My gift was in wisdom, in the knowledge of life. I knew what I had to do to restore justice. I didn't sue. I didn't destroy. I united. I told them that Robert had invested most of his money in a risky fund. I told them that he had realized his mistake, but didn't have time to fix it. I told them that I wanted us to unite, to fight together. Brenda looked at me, and in her eyes I saw not only tears, but also respect. Martha, you're a very strong woman. I was strong because I was his wife, I said. I was his shore. And now I want to be your shore. We united. We hired new lawyers, and we sued the financial consultant who had conned Robert. We used all his records, all his chat logs, to prove that he had been deceived. The trial lasted several months. And we won. We got back all the money that had been stolen from Robert, and we divided it equally between us. We became a family. A different one, but just as close. In the end, I realized that my story wasn't about betrayal. It was about love, about forgiveness, and about the fact that family isn't just about blood. It's a choice. And I chose to be a part of this family.